You're standing surrounded by your teammates, preparing for the New Zealand haka. As you stand staring down the greatest ever rugby team on earth, they cut their throat before taking up positions. The challenge is set and the energy is radiant. Are you ready to go toe-to-toe with the most revered rugby nation on earth? Well, for the men from the southern tip of Africa, facing this challenge happened no fewer than 106 times, drawing the battle lines and setting up an epic showdown of gladiators. It has become one of the greatest rivalries in sport, often being compared to the likes of El Clasico, as these players leave it all on the line for the nation's pride. But it can often get out of control, with fans, coaches and players often letting the pressure get to them. So get ready as we explore the greatest rugby rivalry on the planet and how it all culminated on October 28, 2023, in one of the most anticipated Rugby World Cup finals ever played. Both New Zealand and South Africa have a rich history of rugby, dating back to the early 20th century. However, the first encounter between these two foes only took place in 1921, in front of a sold-out Dunedin Stadium, with the men in black running out 13-5 victors and kicking off what has become a massive rivalry. The 1921 tour of New Zealand would end in a draw, with the Springboks and All Blacks both winning a game, and the third one going down as a scoreless draw. To make it even harder to determine who is the best, the second series, which took place 7 years later in 1928, would end the same way. Both teams won 2 games, ending the 4-match series in another draw. It would only be 9 years later in 1937 that the Springboks would win the first series between the two nations, beating the All Blacks 2-1 in their tour of the mighty nation. 12 years later, in 1949, the Springboks would sweep the All Blacks 3-0 in the tour of South Africa, firmly making the Springboks the most dominant team in the rivalry. However, the next 4 decades would see each team trade blows, with numerous series victories for the All Blacks and just one for South Africa in 1970. But everything was set up for the faithful Springboks tour of New Zealand in 1981. Amid the apartheid era, the Springboks were met with massive hostility in New Zealand. The Springboks lost the series and were pelted with flour from the crowd, showing their displeasure at the totalitarian regime. This would end the rivalry between the two nations, with South Africa under the microscope of international sanctions. But we all had it wrong, and this was actually when it all started. As apartheid was ending, the Springboks and All Blacks would once again meet in South Africa in 1992. The All Blacks ran out victors and continued their dominance over the Springboks for 3 more years. However, South Africa was selected to not only participate in the 1995 Rugby World Cup, but also be held in the small country. The day was June 24, 1995, and in front of a packed Ellis Park Stadium in Johannesburg, the Springboks would take this rivalry to a different level. South Africa ran out 15-12 victors in the final, showing New Zealand that they should not be underestimated when it comes to the Rugby World Cup. Unfortunately, the celebrations were cut short, as for the next 2 decades, the mighty All Blacks would lose only 14 of the 42 encounters they had with the Springboks. During this period, South Africa would become the second nation with Australia to hold 2 Webb Ellis trophies, leaving the mighty All Blacks in the dust with only a single World Cup victory to their name. Many South African supporters were quick to point out that the All Blacks can only win a World Cup when the Springboks are barred from playing. You see, even though the All Blacks would find a comfortable nesting place at the top of the World Rugby rankings, they simply could not capitalise at World Cups. Offering entering the tournament with the best team has put pressure on them, forcing them to bow out on numerous occasions when they were in serious contention. However, the 2011 Rugby World Cup tournament changed all this, and the fact that it was hosted in New Zealand simply gave them the edge. In one of the toughest finals ever to be played, the All Blacks ran out 8-7 victors over a brave French side looking to offset the Southern Hemisphere and bring back another Webb Ellis trophy for the French faithful. New Zealand followed this up, bagging the 2015 Webb Ellis Trophy, making them the first ever rugby nation to win back-to-back titles and solidifying their name as the greatest rugby nation in the world. But back in South Africa, a young former Springbok by the name of Rassie Erasmus was coming of age, and he had a point to prove after losing to the All Blacks in 2003 whilst captaining his side. As South African rugby was on the brink of collapse, a decision was made to bring in someone who'd been controversial in leading both the local Cheetahs and Stormers teams to success. This man was Rassie Erasmus, and through meticulous planning and studying, he was able to determine weaknesses in teams that have never been seen before. You see, Erasmus had this vision of what South Africa and the Springboks could be, and he always sought to unite the nation. In one of the most controversial fashions, he would assign the inexperienced Siya Kolisi to captain the Boks, trusting that this young man would not only come of age, but had the charisma to unite a nation in the same way the late Nelson Mandela once did. Rassie would start building his team, picking players that would irk the media and transforming them into global superstars. These bold decisions would lead the Springboks to their second Webb Ellis Trophy in 2019, a year in which the Springboks were technically still rebuilding and the favourite All Blacks were on the verge of winning their fourth and third one back-to-back. After facing the devastation of the COVID-19 pandemic, stopping all South African rugby for a year, many were once again ready to write them off. But as the 2023 Rugby World Cup came along, the now director of Springbok Rugby had a few plans up his sleeve. You see, the Boks were initially pulled in the group of death, and even if they were to make it out, the odds were against them. Chances were they would meet France or the All Blacks in the quarterfinals, with a rematch against old foe England waiting in the semi. Through sheer persistence, the Boks would overcome both these European foes, setting them up for a 1995 rematch against the All Blacks. Now, you can say what you want, but the final was one of the toughest games ever played, and while many decisions could be frowned upon, the Springboks were standing triumphant when Wayne Barnes blew his final whistle. But even though it was a great spectacle on the field, fans seemingly didn't respect their rivalry between the two great nations. Regardless of who wins or loses, rugby is a time when fans band together and have fun with their mates. Win or lose, respect should be shown to the other team, but a recent culture has broken out that has simply gone on to ruin the rivalry. Aside from many referees being fearful of officiating this game, the fans have gone from innocent banter to all-out hatred for one another. Fans are threatening each other, fighting, and simply disrespecting their opposition. Lately, videos have been surfacing from within South Africa simply mocking the great All Black haka, and people are directly biting into the characters of players. Yes, this is a consequence of playing such a competitive sport, but fans with absolutely no idea of what it takes to play at these levels are voicing their negative opinions, driving away players and fans from this great rivalry that we hope will continue for the next 100 years. It's easy to say that through these negative opinions and disrespect, the rivalry has turned sour. And from both teams' perspective, it's not only about winning and showing who's best, but more about not losing for fear of being ridiculed on social media. A simple social media check will show you tons of viral videos of fans now turning to disgraceful actions and memes that could certainly attack the players themselves. Not only this, but referees have been taking all the flack. Days after the conclusion of the Rugby World Cup, referee Wayne Barnes received numerous death threats. It could even be argued that the problem lies within World Rugby, and that controversy might be a way of their egos getting in the way. So with the world now on the brink of deciding what to do next with the current situation, it seems that the days of the Springboks and All Blacks creating a positive energy vibe has long passed. But do you think that this situation can be remedied, or has it all gone to shreds? Let us know in the comments.